curioso que nos acompañe también, por favor, aquí al frente, el doctor Walter Curioso, es director general de la Oficina General de Estadística e Informática del Ministerio de Salud. Walter, adelante. Y estamos también conectados con el señor Ministro de Salud, el doctor Alberto Tejada Noriega. Él va a tener también una participación importante ahora con nosotros en el curso de nuestra ceremonia de inauguración.
De la Cámara de Comercio ha organizado el primer Congreso Internacional denominado Infraestructura e Innovación Tecnológica para el Desarrollo con Inclusión Social. Este importante certamen ocurre en momentos en que las tecnologías de la información y comunicaciones constituyen, mediante su incorporación a la educación y al proceso productivo, el principal soporte para elevar la productividad, la competitividad de las personas, de las empresas y de los países. Pero asimismo ocurre cuando el Perú acaba de ser elegido para presidir en el periodo 2012-2013 la Comisión de Ciencia y Tecnología para el Desarrollo de las Naciones Unidas, en mérito a la extensa presentación que hizo ante ese foro sobre el examen de las políticas de ciencia, tecnología e innovación en el Perú, elaborado por la UNTAD. Allí se indica que el gobierno peruano tiene como prioridad el fortalecimiento de las políticas nacionales en ciencia y tecnología e innovación, con el propósito de lograr un desarrollo sostenible con inclusión social. Las circunstancias pues son las más auspiciosas tanto para mostrar las tecnologías de vanguardia en la informática y las telecomunicaciones, como para exponer los más avanzados hitos en el ordenamiento de la información y su contribución para el desarrollo.
De salud, y desde aquí, con todo este auditorio, al doctor Tejada va nuestro saludo. Doctor Curioso.
Gracias. Muy buenos días con todos. Para nosotros es un honor estar presentes en el primer Congreso Internacional de ExpoTIC. Y el día de hoy el Ministro de Salud se está conectando utilizando justamente las tecnologías de información y comunicación. El día de hoy en la mañana teníamos que viajar de urgencia a la ciudad de Cusco. Sin embargo, estamos conectados gracias a la maravilla de la tecnología. Y en estos momentos el señor Ministro de Salud, Alberto Tejada, va a dar un saludo a todos los asistentes del evento. Doctor Alberto Tejada, buenos días.
Muy buenos días desde la milenaria y hermosa ciudad de Cusco. Reciban ustedes un especial saludo desde aquí, apelando, insisto, esta...
El tema de la equidad, de la igualdad, el acceso a la educación, el tema, por ejemplo, de la no discriminación, el tener una valoración distinta en una sociedad.
Muy buenos días. Bienvenidos a la jornada de educación. El Congreso Internacional de Tecnologías de Información y Comunicaciones, Infraestructura e Innovación Tecnológica, Desarrollo con Inclusión Social, tenía que incluir una jornada relacionada al tema de la formación, al tema en donde todos estamos comprometidos para lograr los niveles de competitividad deseados. Hoy día sabemos que nuestra participación en el mercado no es una cuestión de mano de obra barata, sino de mano de obra competitiva. Y para lograrlo, los fundamentos de la educación se tienen que fortalecer. En esta jornada nos acompañan distinguidas personalidades que provienen de experiencias diversas. Desde Estados Unidos, desde Finlandia, nos acompaña en la mesa Robert Hacker y también Christian Holm. Robert Hacker, Bob, ya vivió en Perú. Él estuvo en los años 80 y 81 como consultor de Centromín. Conoce.
And I worked here for 2 years. And then I did not come back to Peru until 2009 when I joined One Laptop Per Child. I can tell you that you folks have made tremendous progress, and I'm hoping that OLPC will accelerate that progress. As I said, I joined OLPC in 2009, and to talk a little bit about it, OLPC was founded by Nicholas Nagel, education of their children. And we have that vertical line. There's a very nice correlation between the year it was introduced and the average growth in skills learning and type of thinking that the 21st century demands. Carmack's notion that the individual is the limitation the IGB is saying that we can use one-to-one computing with connected laptops to develop those skills that Carmack says children need to have to function successfully.
Importantes. Los instrumentos los necesitamos. Muchas gracias, Bob. Ahora tenemos la ocasión de conocer sobre el trabajo desarrollado por Jan-Marcus Holm. Él desde Finlandia nos va a mostrar la experiencia que ha desarrollado.
Gracias. Buenos días, señoras y señores. And now let's change to English, because that's almost everything that I can say in Spanish for now, but I promised for several people to start to learn some Spanish. Okay, so nice to see so many of you here. Are you doing good? Please, okay, raise your hands. Are you doing good? Great, great. So we're talking about education. So this is the first steps in education. You can raise your hand for an answer. Okay.
Traditional methods that center around the classrooms will become a thing of the past. In the school of the future, learning environments will be enriched by utilizing new spaces for project and teamwork as well as independent learning.
And better down here and the OECD average. So I just wanted to quickly show you what it's about in PISA. It's very good assessment, and of course we have very hard job in Finland as well to keep up doing the
Una preocupación que va desde el desarrollo del individuo hacia una colectividad, una suerte de colectivismo, de integración en la que todos debemos estar comprometidos. Pero le voy a dar una noticia a Marcos. Finlandia está muy bien en PISA, pero Perú pronto va a estar mejor. Esto debe ser. Bueno, muchas gracias a Marcus Holm y a Bob Hacker, y en nombre de la Cámara de Comercio de Lima, con nuestro agradecimiento, queremos con nosotros Claudia Córdoba. Ella es ingeniera industrial de la Universidad Ricardo Palma y tiene una diplomatura en docencia para la formación y la capacitación de la Pontificia Universidad Católica. Es una reconocida investigadora que actualmente está en la red Clara. Esta es una organización que nos ofrece servicios a niveles de los centros académicos más importantes del país y del mundo. Es una red internacional.
Comercio por la invitación. De hecho, tengo que mencionarlo. La primera vez que yo estuve en la organización de un evento fue hace muchísimo tiempo, creo que recordar, en el 90 y tantos. Y justo cuando me enteré que en el mismo escenario iba a estar el Gemini Decay, me acordé de que en aquella primera conferencia en la que yo estuve trabajando un poco de organización, trajimos a un robot igual que este, que se llamaba Don Cuco el Guapo. Era un robot hecho por la Universidad Benemérita Autónoma de Puebla.
Muchas gracias a Claudia Córdoba, que hay algunas inquietudes en el pesquero. En Perú hay 100 universidades, un poco más. Esperamos que pronto otras se incorporen a esta red, puesto que el proceso...
Modernización del Estado, seguridad, salud y educación. Esos son los 4 pilares que Microsoft Perú se ha abocado. Vamos 17 años en el país y vamos a seguir aportando con nuestro grano de arena en tecnología sobre el tema de educación de calidad. Déjenme darles un contexto de dónde estamos el día de hoy como país. Va a ser una herramienta espectacular para su desarrollo. Y simplemente, ya para terminar,
Obviamente que para lograr la autonomía habrá que incluirla en un nuevo formato de competencia digital que es imprescindible se incluya en los diseños curriculares nacionales. Nuestro agradecimiento tanto a Claudia Córdoba como a Guillermo Guzmán Católica, así como el desarrollo del sistema equipo. Dentro de su producción académica es autor de diversas publicaciones, libros técnicos, ensayos y artículos en general. Con la compañía de Mallorca y el Orgoísmo abrimos una ronda de exposiciones, panel, y empezaremos con la participación de Mallorca, que también hará referencias a su experiencia en Colombia.
Actividades virtuales y reales debe ser potenciado aún más. Una experiencia que hemos tenido en la Universidad Católica fue crear el sistema organizacional equipo. ¿Qué hacemos? Invitar a alumnos y profesores en una primera etapa a que se junten alrededor de temas que les gustan o les apasionan. Y lo invitar es que se encuentren físicamente. Pero tenemos un portal en el cual se van instalando y nos enteramos de qué hacen, qué pretenden hacer.
A Enrique Álvarez y Eduardo Ismoes, y vamos a despedirlos con un fuerte aplauso y con un retorno de este congreso.
Nuestra Expotic, como también nuestro primer congreso.
Luces. Falta por un video. Light.
One of us is an android. One of us is a machine. Is this the beginning of a nightmare? Thought fulfillment. Utterly.
Jobs very well, if at all. Many of us even have technologies inside us. And that means that our foundation for modern life is very, very different from that of our ancestors. I often think about my grandmother. Just 2 generations ago, my father's mother, she was born in 1896. She was born into a place with no electricity. She could remember the first car that came to the town. She could remember the first light bulb that went on in the street. And in the evening, they would go there from the different houses. They would go to this place to watch the burning light bulb. And that is 2 generations ago. Today, we are surrounded by technologies in all kinds. Think, the way that we behave, and the way that we see the world. And what the Android project here is really about is trying to get a hold on this from a new angle. You see, we know very, very deep down that there is so much hope and so many dreams connected to our technological future. We know that if we are to answer the big problems in the world, poverty, disease, all these things, then we need our technologies. It is simply impossible for us to engage in these huge problems, solve the energy crisis and other things, without help of technology. So we think about all these things that are so wonderful around us. We can end up in the opposite situation of what we wanted. Another very easy example to understand is that
We have a lot of fast cars. I have seen a lot of very fast cars here in Lima. I've also seen some not so fast cars. But if you think about it, there has never been so much horsepower on the streets of our cities as there is today. Never. But what do we get? Do we get around really fast? No. We get traffic jams. The problem is not that we have very young, is that when you look back, you can sometimes begin to see lines converging. So I have been occupied with many, many different things, and many different things have led me to this place. But I also begin to understand and to see that there are certain similarities between these things that I have been doing for many, many years. The one thing that has been the constant in most of my life is that I have spent almost all my life doing what human beings do all the time. And that is, I try to make sense of the world. Maybe that's the greatest of all human enterprises. We need to make sense of the world that we are in the middle of. And I have done this in different ways. One of the ways is that for several years, when I was a very young man, I devoted myself to the study of religions. Christianity in particular, because of the place where I grew up, but also other religions. And I think there is something really fascinating about religion, and that is that you can begin by asking these very, very large questions, extremely large questions, and try to formulate answers into a language that may not even exist. So, for instance, you can ask questions like, why does the universe look the way it does? What is the purpose of my life? Is there a purpose of my life? Why should I live in a certain way among the people that I'm here with? What is love? All these very, very big questions. You don't really expect very short and very precise answers to that kind of questions. And the religions are ways of thinking about these matters. And so what happens is that you have these systems of thought where you try to take answers to these important questions and formulate them even beyond words, because there may not be a language to talk about these very, very big things. Another thing that occupied me for many years was music, and I still love music. This is an interest that has followed me for many, many years. There's something extremely fascinating about music. The musical system is very, very simple. There are just 12 notes, right? And we only use 8 at a time. It's very limited when you think about it as a language of music. But because we are human beings, we can take music and we can use that to express things that are otherwise really difficult to express, like emotions. So if someone is very much in love, feeling very sad, feeling very happy, perhaps it's difficult to say these things in words, but you can put it into music. And even though there are just so few notes, and we only use so many at a time, still, every day, I can listen to music that I've never heard before, and hear songs that I never knew existed. So it's a very restricted vocabulary, but the human mind keeps using these things to expand and expand and expand, and express ourselves in new and exciting ways. Actually, it was also music that brought me into computers. I think we have a picture here of some of the instrument that I played when I was a young man. That's a little while ago. Stuff like this, because I realized that using these synthesizers, this is an old synthesizer, I could make sounds that were compelling and interesting, even though I had not been playing the piano since I was a very little boy. These are actually very interesting machines. The one over here, the one on your left, big machine here, it's the size of a wall. It's almost as big as, well, half as big as the stage. And you can sit in front of this machine and you can turn the knobs. It is a little bit like being at Kennedy Space Center or something like that. And you can sit there and design the sound that you want to come out in the end. Sometimes you can spend an hour or 2 hours with this machine before it even begins to speak or say anything. There's no keyboard. You have to attach the keyboard later on. So each of these arrays up here of knobs is a unity that makes a sound. You can have another unity that controls the first sound. So let's say that sound number 1 is do, and sound number 2 is very low. And you have sound number 2 control sound number 1, then you get, or you can speed it up, and you can go on, making these wonderful sounds that you've never heard before. I realized that these machines has a capability that is not maybe normally associated with technologies, because much of our technologies even back then was considered to be tools. They were just machines that perform some sort of job for us, and that's the idea. But by exploring these machines and how we can use these machines to express ourselves and to make meaning in the world around us, we can look at different aspects of technology. Let's see if I can get to the next one. Can we advance the slide, maybe? Here we go. Here is another thing that I spent many years trying to study, and that is how we tell stories. So when I came to university, it was quite normal. It was an easy choice for me to study communication, because I was interested in how you make sense of the world. And I came across this very, very strange phenomenon of storytelling that I already knew from religious studies. The very strange thing about stories is that they don't have to be true. You know, many of the stories that we like the most are not true at all. They're completely bogus. Like we see in the movies, people go to a galaxy a million light years away and they speak English or they speak Spanish with very nice accents. It doesn't happen. The thing about stories is that this is a very subtle way, refined way of communicating about things that can be very, very complicated. But the story is never about just the words in it, it's always about something else. So for instance, I don't believe there ever was a man that could just touch things and they would turn into gold. I don't think that man ever existed. But I do know people who can only talk money and turn even family matters into a matter of money. You understand what I'm saying? You know these kinds of people, don't you? And if you look at someone like that who can only think about the cost of a vacation rather than spending time with the family and enjoying it, then you understand the story of Midas. Also, I don't believe that there is a 300-meter monster lurking underneath the Pacific, waiting to wake. I don't believe that. But when you have seen what a tsunami can do to Japan, let's say, that can almost make someone like Godzilla look really, really small. Right? Because these massive things from the ocean that can well up and just destroy everything, that makes sense to talk about this in terms of monsters. So I've been fascinated with these things. And when I came to university, I also, because I have this interest in computers, I spent many years trying to make computer models of how to take these different kinds of knowledge and put them into computer systems. Now this is a very nice graph, I think. I like these wonderful things, which explains something which is actually quite complicated, but in a visual representation that is nice and neat, and if you think about it a little bit, it's fairly easy to understand and it makes a lot of sense. Here is another example of how we can make computers work together with storytelling. This is actually a little algorithm or computer script that allows you to identify the hero in a story. It's surprisingly difficult to figure out if you see a movie who's the hero, because the good guy and the bad guy do exactly the same thing. They run around, they shoot people, but they do it in different orders. So you have to have a specialized kind of understanding in order to figure out which is which. I also worked with formal ontologies, that is ways of describing very big and complicated systems in terms of types that relate to other types, and used that to identify specific ways that stories work. These are examples of this.
So these are ways that fairy tales will often begin. Each of the little the letters, A, B, C, D, and so on, corresponds to a fragment of a story that's often there. And this shows us in a nice graphical way how these things can be combined. I just love these figures with a lot of lines in them. They're so fascinating. Here we have another example of, well, there are a lot of lines. This is actually a collection of several hundred small stories, fables of animals and humans trying to do all sorts of things. And I have analyzed how these animals are connected to one another, and you get things like that. So what connects all these dots together? Well, really, all these things are about different ways of trying to make sense of the world. We make sense of the world through the religions. We make sense of the world through our music. We make sense of the world through our stories in an indirect manner. And we make sense of the world through our technologies. Now here's the point. I don't really think that the way we make sense of the world is a linear process. It's not something that just goes from the mind and into the world, or from the world into the mind. I believe this to be a circular process. So when we understand things in terms of other things. And typically, here's what we do. When we want to understand something really big and important, we try to understand it together with other people. Right? So if something wonderful happens to you, you talk about it to your friends, to your family and your neighbors, or something very bad. You talk to your friends and families. And in that process, you begin to understand what's going on. Because you see your own words reflected in those people, in the faces of a friend, and you get it back, this information, but it's not the same anymore, it's enriched. So this kind of loop is always around us. We use other people to understand. If you think about music, this is very easy example, or again religion. We use each other to understand and make sense of what's going on. So in the church or the temple or wherever you want to go, when you meet other people there, you have this sense of belonging with them because they are in this with you. And it makes sense to sing together or chant together or whatever it is that you do when you practice your religion. Or in music. Sometimes, it's fine, just me and my guitar at home, that's good. But often music requires an audience. So it makes sense because it's reflected through other people. We use other people for this. But there is something else. And that is that we use technology in the same way. So when we get curious about something today, what do? We look it up on Google. And we use the technology to gain a deeper understanding of what goes on around us. And in fact, we use the technologies in a variety of different ways today. But much of this has to do with this loop of generating meaning around us. So I maintain that the process of making sense of the world is not a linear process, it is a loop. And I want to put an android in this loop and try to see what happens. Because things can really change if you have something like this that is part of this process of making sense. One of the things that we discovered some years ago is that robots are changing. They're not the way they used to be. And they're changing actually in the same way as the computers have been changing. We used to think about computers as something that was a tool, it would solve a job, make sense out of a lot of numbers in a spreadsheet or balance, that sort of thing. But today we mainly think about computers as media. So we can find information through them, we can present information through the computers, and we can represent ourselves through the computers. The robots are now performing the same kind of action, or the same kind of movement. Most of the robots in the world are machines like this. These are very, very dangerous machines. So what happens when you have machines like this is that you isolate them from people, you put them behind big walls, and no human is allowed in there when the robot is working. Why is that? It's because something like
the welding robots here are very, very powerful machines. And if a human comes too close, then he doesn't have a head anymore. In my university, we have robots with laser guns. And they're so strong that they can sever a structure like this one completely at a distance of 5 kilometers. This is a very, very dangerous robot. If you have a robot like that, you need to be very, very careful about what you do. This one is much more docile, so you don't need to worry. There are no laser guns hidden inside the jacket here. So most of the robots we have today are hidden in factories, they're hidden in production facilities, or they're in agriculture. Where I live, it's most common that the milk you drink in the morning will be provided by a milking robot. So it's actually a machine that's milking the cows and bringing also the milk to the consumer where it needs to go. But in the last decade or so, we have seen a new kind of robots emerge, and these are creatures like these ones. And clearly they're meant for other purposes. We don't want these kinds of robots to be tucked away behind walls. They are designed for the complete opposite. They are designed for close interaction with people. Some of them are toys, some of them are aids. If you have lost the ability to use your legs, maybe you can have someone pick you up and put you in a chair or take you to the bath or whatever. And this kind of robot becomes much more friendly, in fact, if you have a face on it. So people react more kindly to the robot with a face rather than just a crane that you can move around and maneuver in very mechanical ways. So we have begun to see over these years robots with faces, robots that are designed for interactive purposes and need to be very, very close to us. But one of the problems from this is that we still have no idea which kind of robot that should go in which kind of situation. We simply don't know. And much more research is needed in order to find to that place. Same as with the computers, we can also use the robots to represent ourselves. And the last two examples here are examples of that. The long neck one there is called a giraffe. It's a little robot that can move around. It has a screen. And you can project your own face to that, which means that you can have your face in two places. Not just like on Skype, but it's actually moving around. And again, of course, we have this urge to make things and make technologies that look more or less like ourselves. This is an age-old dream to have these machines that look like us. So we have moved from thinking about robotics as something that is purely mechanical, purely industry-based, to robots as something that is very close to home, maybe inside the home, and as something that is designed for very close interaction with people. Here are some other examples. This little toy robot here looks like a baby seal, and this robot is designed in Japan, and it's used for the treatment of elderly people with dementia. In my country, we have more than 200 of these robots in nursing homes. And we know that in many cases, the robot can reach to the heart of this old person in ways that no animal can do, and in ways that no other human can do. Because there is a special quality in the robot that allows people to connect with it in certain ways. So there are many examples of people who are lonely, who are, their mind is gone dark because of dementia, and they will not talk to anybody, but they talk to the robot. So maybe an old man says to the robot, do you also have such pains in your leg? Now, in fact, this one doesn't really have a leg. But when the nursing staff people heard this, they realized, this is why this man has stopped walking. He's not taking his long trips anymore. His legs are hurting. But they found out about that through the robot. There are many examples like this. And in this case, when we build robots like these, then we actually take this even a step further, because we want to have a machine that is as close as possible to the human experience. And these three examples here are, these three pictures are pictures. Right. One of the things that the Android allows us to do is to think about ordinary things in our lives in new ways. For instance, we all know what it's like to be someplace. We're all someplace right now. We're here, close together. But we also have this notion of maybe someone is in the room, but the mind has drifted off, and then we're not so present anymore. And when people meet something like this, strange things happen. So we've been trying to understand what happens when people look at this robot and try to understand and make sense of the world. What is going on here? If you spend a little time with this machine, clearly you understand this is a robot. This is not a normal person. You can see this, right? I hope you can see this. But you also, at the same time, realize that the human shape is so important and you need to react to that. It's quite compelling. And I can tell you back home in my lab, when people come visit the lab, even if he's turned off completely, people will still enter the lab and they will say hello to the robot. I do that myself sometimes. And that's not because it's a fancy machine, that's because it looks like this. Now we don't think that people react to him as a robot or as a human being, but rather we think that people react to both these things at the same time. But inside the mind, we make a new entity, which is a blend of these two. So at once, we perceive this as a human being and as a machine. Can we advance the slides, please? There you go. And we call this phenomenon blended presence. For some people, the robot side is really, really big, and it's very difficult to find room for the human side. So you look at this robot, this is really a machine. Wow, it's interesting. What can we do with him? Can I touch him? Can I do different things to him? For other people, they will start at the opposite side of the spectrum. They will see this as the human form. This is like a person. And I behave around a person in different ways. I don't usually come up to people that I don't know, start touching their face and rub their noses. I don't do that. So they would be much more reluctant. They will stay back from the robot and treat it with the kind of respect that you would normally give someone who looks like this, at least a little bit of respect. But the interesting thing here then is that we can move people across this axis, because how you do this depends on your age, if you're very young, or a teenager or a mature person. It also depends very much on gender distinctions. So women view this robot in one particular way, and men look at him at a very different way. And that means that if we are to design robots in the future that are to be around us and live in us, what happens? Because strange things happen when we do that. For instance, we put him in a shop window. One of my friends has a men's fashion shop, so we put the Android there. And for a week, you could go into this store and you can talk to the robot, talk to the mannequin. And we found it was very easy to interact with people that way. We could have conversations with it. But I was sitting out in the back controlling the Android, and I would suggest to people, why don't you come and feel the quality of the shirt I'm wearing? It's very good quality. And people wouldn't do that. Now the normal scenario when you go into a shop like that is that you feel all the fabrics in the room, right? Especially women. You shop with your fingers all the time. But in this case, it was very, very difficult for us to make people actually come and feel the shirt. Why? Because then the human side feels so much. Right? So we needed to adjust a little bit the scenario to make room for the robot side in order for this to addition the scenario. This is actually all within reach, but it's only within reach if we reach together. We have to come up with new ways of working together, or we have to come up with new ways of doing research. Otherwise, these things will never be realized. I'm very often asked to speculate about the far future. What will our robotic future look like 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now? It's difficult. The last request about 100 years into the future, that came from Russia. It's good to know the Russians are thinking ahead. 100 years into the future, what's it going to look like? So I thought about this long and hard, and I've reached the conclusion that to precisely predict our technological future that far away is impossible. But it's also irrelevant. It doesn't really make any sense, it doesn't matter. It's impossible and it's irrelevant to predict these things for exactly the same future, exactly the same reason that it is impossible and irrelevant to try to predict what kind of stories will be told, what kind of music will be played, what kind of movies will be seen 10, 50, or 100 years from now. It doesn't make any sense. And that is because even though we may not have a very broad vocabulary, or maybe we have very strict time restrictions in technology, like in music, the thing is that we will still, because we are human beings, come up with new and interesting ways of interpreting this life that we live. And that is exactly the point. Luckily, what we need to do in order to live in this world as responsible people with resolve and with dignity in our technological future does not depend on how well we can precisely predict it. It depends on something completely different. The reason is that if we want to come up with good solutions for this planet, for our children, and for all the people in it, the answers to these things will not be more technology. That is not what we're looking for. Also, the answers will not come from technology. In fact, that's hardly relevant. But instead, these answers will come through technology as we use these machines to gain a better and a deeper understanding of ourselves and this world we live in. And that is really the strongest message that I can give to the people of Lima today, is that in all of these things our technological future has to give, the really, really important thing is that we stay human where it really matters.
Thank you all. Thank you for your attention.
And I thank you as well.
Gonzalo, por acá, por favor. Pero no tengo la mano ahorita. ¿Ves? Es el caso de la famosa contraluz.
Tengo para trabajar música. Te voy a mostrar este que está aquí. Si yo estoy trabajando historia.
Cámara de turbina alámbrica. ¿Y eso qué es? No, ven. Esta es la cámara, mira la cámara. Esa cámara aquí, esa es la que, de alta definición. La cámara de alta definición. Es del equipo, el iPad. El dispositivo lo saca
Tiene una entrada cargador micro USB. O sea, de paso que vas jugando, también va cargando. Nunca se te va a apagar el celular. Por la parte posterior conectas el mando en el nombre con el PlayStation original. Y puedes
ya juega, claro.
Exacto.
Micro HDMI, primera vez que ve que existe la...
Puedes jugar con el mando de esta manera, ¿no?
Sí, tipo Donkey Kong, pero más o menos.
Exacto. No,
pero en 3D. No, es el mismo celular, lo conecta con el mando.
Ya, ahorita lo estamos lanzando, aproximadamente unos 7 días, el teléfono ya está ingresando.
En esta ocasión tenemos 3 equipos participantes, 2 representados por Icabot y uno de Extremebot. Bueno, para informarles un poco la...
Acá está lo mío, arriba, pero es un primo.
Y puedes poner varios proyectores juntos.
Ya no conoce, porque ya sé que... Debe acá. No, pero